Well, hi everyone. I am just so excited to be here and just so excited to see the great turnout and interest in this project. And we'll just see how we do this together. While it is a demonstration project and we have a pretty good idea of the pilot of DV Housing First that we are at that demonstration phase of, we're still evolving and we're still learning. So the agenda is going to be just a quick history and overview, especially for those of you who are not that familiar with DV Housing First, just very, very brief. We'll talk a little bit about the vision, what the project goals are, and what participation will look like. I think many of you are very, very interested in that. What would it take? What are you thinking about? What is it looking like? And then the next steps, the timeline, and questions at the end, though I'm hoping that Erin will certainly watch the chat box as well as your hands so that if a critical clarifying question comes up, we can certainly stop and take that. So just a really quick overview of Domestic Violence Housing First. As many of you, most of you probably know, this is a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation project. They certainly were curious with the Housing First buzz whether or not that would work for DV survivors. And of course, one of the things about Housing First is that it is no barrier, that people have a right to housing, people could be accessing housing and receive services after they're in housing. And of course, that really requires a wide range of housing options for the different people that we see. And so far in our testing of this project with our 13 agencies, what has emerged, of course, is the whole concept of mobile, trauma-informed, survivor-driven advocacy. The mobile advocacy really came from Chris Gilhart and her Portland Volunteers of America Home Free program. It was just an exciting possibility of really being survivor responsive, so that certainly many survivors appreciate coming to our offices, but many, many more also really like to have the freedom to choose where a good and safe place would be to meet. Flexible financial assistance is one thing that you have all probably heard about from those organizations that have received this particular grant from the Gates Foundation. It's wide open. It's totally survivor-driven. There are no parameters around what it would be eligible, what the activities should be. I love Becca Corby's comment about it from Healthy Families in Clallam County, as she calls it, happy money. And that really is the experience that we've heard from all of the advocates of really doing flexible financial assistance. The partnerships with landlords and public housing authorities, as well as housing homeless organizations, are critical along the way in terms of access to housing, retention of housing, and finally advocates helping with that housing search. Many of you are already doing this in your programs, but we found that it is key for DV survivors to have that partnering advocate with them as they wish, at the timing that works for them, to the housing places that they are able to choose for themselves, having their rah-rah section. A little bit of the history. Again, we've been doing this for 5 years, launched in '09 with 4 programs. We added 9 more. And this was one of those exciting possibilities where the Gates Foundation was so intrigued by the promising results that were happening that they said, well, let's add another year to the first cohort, and then we'll do another 4-agency cohort for 3 years, with 1 overlapping. And the responses from all of you, many of you, was just so tremendous that the foundation said, well, maybe we just need to accept a few more programs in since there is so much interest. So that was just a great first start. And as you'll hear a little bit later in the presentation, the foundation has been extremely happy with the continuing, emerging, and promising practices to the point that they've invited another 5-year demonstration project. And sorry about the siren in the back. That's just where we are in downtown Seattle. So in 2015, we are looking forward to launching Phase 3, our demonstration project, and there will be a whole lot of work to do with all of you, all of us, between now and then. The things in particular that the Gates Foundation has been very excited about is that through our focus groups, we've been hearing how much domestic violence housing first improves survivors' health and well-being, and that this also, with the housing stability, has created a very nurturing and supportive environment for children. Both of these things are strong outcomes in terms of thinking about brain development, children's development, healing from trauma, and resiliency. So the information coming from survivors in their focus groups and interviews, as well as from advocates, really excited that interest. And it led us to saying in our evaluation that the housing, of course combined with the amazing advocacy work that our advocates do, lays the foundation for safety, self-determination, and stability. And with the flexibility of DV Housing First, that it is in the community, or a survivor is able to choose the community that she wants to be in, whether she needs to leave her community or whether she wants to return to her community of origin or stay there, there is the ability for this approach to be culturally responsive. So from pilot to demonstration project, we talked a lot internally about what this might look like, and realizing with the Gates Foundation interest of transforming systems as being another thing that they really were hoping that that could happen with this, would be the idea of not just agencies coming to the table and even potentially competing against one another, but rather for regions, one urban, one rural, to work together, the organizations within a region, to transform their system, both their internal domestic violence system, their own agency culture, the work they do with other domestic violence agencies that are close by, programs, as well as how they're working with their housing homeless providers. So for those of you who have asked, so what is a region? A region would be, at your definition, and thinking about who do you work with now? What DV agency are you working side by side with to kind of expand your own resources when one person has one type of program or housing space somewhere that the other agency can certainly access, as well as, of course, the work that you're doing with your housing homeless programs and what kind of resource they can be. I'm rattling right along. I'm going to take a breath and see if there are any clarifying questions. Nope. Okay. Oh. Is there a question? All right, so it looks like, other than a few original technical issues, which I hope has been settled or resolved for you, and I know Erin would be working on that, let's go ahead and move on with the goals of this particular project. And this wasn't something that we necessarily created in a vacuum. Because the Gates Foundation invites applications, and they really think very carefully through what they're looking for and what are their own organizational goals, both nationally as well as regionally. We had many, many conversations over the past few months about what makes sense, both for them as well as for us. There's so much we want to find out and so much we want to do together. So our first goal is is the bigger picture, improving the health and well-being for domestic violence survivors and their children. The second goal is increasing the level of evidence that documents the relationship between DV advocacy, housing stability, and improved health and well-being for survivors and their children. So I'm going to take a breath right there and go back to that whole idea of improving health and well-being. And of course, we can only project that right now. We only have heard what survivors are telling us immediately. We don't know what happens longitudinally. We don't know where their children end up down the road, how they're doing. So one of the things to really substantiate our work a little bit more was to really call upon the concept of having a research project. And we have gotten Chris Sullivan, Dr. Chris Sullivan, to collaborate with us on this, and she will be working on this in a way that we can really show the world, so to speak, the great work that we do in terms of advocacy, and combine that with housing stability and draw a correlation 2-3 years down the road of where survivors and their children are. So Chris is in the middle of designing that research right now. It will certainly depend upon who our partners end up being, but she's looking forward to working with us out here so that there is that sense of documentation for our work, both for us and, of course, as you all know, we're not in HMIS in a way that can be tracked. We don't enter personally identifying information. So the world of HUD is also very interested in getting a better understanding of what does it take for DV survivors to reach housing stability. And so finally, the third goal, and this is another big one for the Gates Foundation and their regional goals in terms of ending family homelessness, their family homelessness initiative. Several of you are cooperating on that, so familiar with it. But the foundation is interested in how can we improve housing systems and policies for everybody, but in particular because survivors and their children, again, are so lost in the system. How can we improve it across the board so that DV survivors, their safety, their special needs are a part of whatever system, whether it's a coordinated entry and access or whether it is that continuum of housing resources and options that are available, that we know that survivors are taken care of and their needs addressed. Technical difficulties, we'll get there. Thank you. So digging into the first goal a little bit more, improve health and well-being, and what is it that we want to do in order to pursue this? And this is where we start right with the individual organizational culture. So while domestic violence programs will be coming as a region, maybe 2 to 4 DV programs in that region, possibly more. Again, there's quite a few questions yet related to the funding support from local jurisdictions. But as we look at each individual DV agency, how can we affirm or assure that organizational policies, protocols really reflect survivor-centered, trauma-informed, culturally relevant mobile advocacy? And budget, too, because budget is a huge thing. If you're looking at mileage, if you're looking at advocates who are out on the road traveling. I know a couple of our current cohort agencies have purchased vans or have had vans provided to them, the vehicles provided for advocates to use. So how can we really think about this concept reflected within the organizational culture? It would be important for advocates to be trained in survivor-centered, trauma-informed advocacy, culturally relevant. And of course, most of our advocates receive absolutely wonderful rookies training right now, but digging a little bit more into what does it look like to be responsive in the community, to meet people where they are, to really be thoughtful and reflective about their cultural context. The distribution of financial assistance as a part of that advocacy, and that is certainly, again, an internal structure of empowering advocates to make some of these decisions. How might that happen? How would an agency structure a budget with financial assistance involved that could easily respond, again, to some of the basic needs, whether that's rental assistance for a few months, whether that is a washing machine, whether that is getting things related to your employment taken care of, a wide variety of things. And finally, those relationships. It's not only about the relationships that advocates have with survivors that are so critical. It's the relationships that advocates and program management have with their community resources, so that we know these folks before we even are advocating on behalf of survivors. There's already the relationship there. And of course, I know many of you are already doing that and familiar with that. The second goal, again, is that longitudinal research. And we'll come back to that a little bit later, but this is a critical part in terms of being able to select a sample. And as I said, Chris is designing that research right now. I don't know quite yet what it will look like, but it, again, will depend upon the size of the sample and who's involved. And then finally, that improvement of housing systems. As we talk about a comprehensive housing first system, you know, we all say together, and I've heard many of you say, it's hard to do housing first when there's no affordable housing available. And that is so very true. So what does our housing first system look like? Who are we working with? What is the housing relationships with public housing authorities? Are there housing developers in your community? If you're rural, do you have a variety of landlords that rent out parts of their homes, managed trailer parks, mobile homes, manufactured housing? Just what is that range of housing that might be accessible in your community that you could develop and strengthen those relationships? From the point of permanent housing, if someone wants to stay in their home, how could you help them do that or return to their home? Accessing new housing through something like a rapid rehousing model. Permanent supportive housing. There are some DV survivors that could certainly qualify for that. And I think the most critical one that we all see is the housing where we need a deeper subsidy for a longer period of time for survivors. That often even goes far beyond what transitional housing has traditionally been able to provide. So that's a system that we need to be thinking about and developing the components that might not already be there. You know, there's that coordinated entry and access assessment. It's not going anywhere. And how can we work with the local system in order to consider access to a system of housing resources that both considers the trauma, the privacy needs, the different things that a survivor wants and needs in terms of choice. I think it's a conundrum when we're talking about survivor-centered and survivors being able to choose their community when there is a coordinated entry system for many of us that is still saying, here is the unit that's available and this is where you need to go. And if you turn it down 2 times, then you go to the bottom of the list. So I know that doesn't necessarily happen in rural communities, but there are many issues in terms of how can we work on this in a positive way with our housing homeless partners and be a resource for them in terms of domestic violence. And finally, we certainly want to see more funding from public and private funders for flexible funding and for DV mobile advocacy. We all know probably that HUD is backing off on services dollars, on some of those unique things that we found so helpful in our transitional housing programs. and that HUD is not good at flexible funding. There are a lot of ineligible activities that might be really critical. So where else can we go? Where in our local jurisdictions, where in the private funding world can we develop and get more money to support the great work that we're doing? So what would participation look like? And these are certainly some challenging concepts. We've already talked a little bit about internal revision of policies, protocols, budgets. There is also the potential of transforming facility-based models. And I know, again, many of you have facilities, and you've done great work with building dignity in terms of rearranging those facilities so that they're more trauma-informed. But the idea of restructuring facilities, or maybe even moving out of them in a way that advocate time can be freed up to be more in the field. So this is a question to explore that we'll be exploring together. Training advocates, we talked about that in this particular model, and establishing relationships. Participation would be that willingness to work with Chris Sullivan and her research assistants in this project, while blissfully, especially for those of you who do DV Housing First right now, we would not be asking advocates to follow up with survivors. That's one of the beauties of research, is that there are people designated to do that. So that burden expectation is removed from an advocate in the long term, and official permission is secured from a survivor to participate. But we would need help from advocates in identifying the survivors. So that cooperation would be really critical. And finally, the transformation of services in a region. Your willingness to partner with your local DV providers, your neighboring providers, as well as the other critical resources in your community. Housing homeless organizations, and I would say other critical resources like employment resources and mental health and chemical dependency resources. All of these things are critical. And of course, the big question, what's in it for me? And again, I know a number of you are very familiar with the current Gates project and the fact that Gates directly funded the 13 agencies that have been involved. They are backing out from that and saying very clearly that they are not going to fund service agencies, at least for this project anymore, that any sort of funding that comes from them would be coming through the coalition. So as we look at the funding available and the key things to do, what we would pledge to participating DV agencies would be, first of all, an initial investment, $20,000 during that first year on that internal work, depending upon consultants needed, time needed, what are the sorts of activities that need to happen for that. We're not going to be hitting the ground running. We're going to take at least a year, maybe even a year and a half or two for a larger jurisdiction. And then because flexible financial assistance is so hard to identify as far as funding sources, $30,000 each for the successive 4 years would be the other pledge that we would make in terms of finances. There would be our staff support with the change process, and we would be working with you to provide technical assistance with communication to your community stakeholders. I am really aware that community stakeholders are very supportive and love the organizations that you currently are, have become the facilities possibly that you are operating, and that trying to change that or transform that will certainly take a little bit of work in order to bring along your entire community. We would certainly support you in systems change with your regional partners. We would provide the training. And of course, I think any program that participates in research conducted by Dr. Sullivan is is just kind of down in the history books. At least that's my personal opinion about the great work she does. So I am going to stop again for a minute before we get into next steps and see if out of all of that there are questions. Erin, has there been anybody?
Hi, this is Erin. No, so far there have not been questions, but I will make sure to share them with the whole audience if we get them so everyone can see.
All right. Okay, no questions so far. My goodness, I thought there would be a ton. Maybe you're formulating them, so that's fine. Next steps.
So, sorry, we do have
application
questions. You'll just need to look at the chat area or the questions area.
Okay. I'm trying to find that. It's here somewhere. Oh, well. Okay, so here we go. Karen, if we work with a centralized intake, do DV Housing First clients have to go through them? You know, I don't think DV Housing First clients would necessarily have to do that. I know for that HUD money, there is the expectation that DV clients would potentially be outside of the centralized intake with a comparable system. Right now what's been happening with DV Housing First is because it is funded by the Gates Foundation, none of the organizations that use this source of funding to access or sustain, retain survivors in housing have included that in the centralized intake that I'm aware of. I don't think so. I realize, however, that resources, being as they are, the flexible financial assistance, would certainly be well supplemented by other funding sources, for example, the Consolidated Homeless Grant as well as HUD, which puts people back in that place of what is the relationship with centralized intake coordinated entry. And that's where I am really hoping that we can do some proactive framing, that we can do a lot more work with those local jurisdictions. I am just determined that in some way or another we can advocate together for, if we have to participate in a system, one that is informed about domestic violence, trauma-informed, and yeah. So I'm not sure if that's a great question to your answer. I'm not thrilled with the concept of centralized intake. I have a hard enough time with coordinated entry at times, and coordinated assessment often pushes me right over the edge. But I think that's up to us to be thoughtful and working with our housing homeless people to figure out how can we do this in a way that is beneficial for everybody. So the next question, $20,000 per region, that is per agency. And the DV agencies, I'll be real specific about that. So I realize that for your housing homeless partners, if they're coming to the table with you, they might be looking for this too, but this is just for the domestic violence program and their mobile advocacy and their own internal changes. Okay. How many agencies can you fund in one region? Thank you so much, Meryl. Right now, we have a budget for 3 agencies in a region. That is very flexible. We can go up. I don't think I'd want to go down. I think it's helpful to have a critical mass of 3. So as we might have mentioned, maybe we did in this webinar, we are looking for other funding sources. And of course, we've already put out feelers that if we look at a region like King County where there are many agencies, we would certainly want to include every agency that was interested in participating, and we would need to cultivate the flexible financial assistance funders to help us do that, and we are actually working on that. Christine, I am also interested in what are the parameters of a region. You know, I think it is what you all make it. It's not something that we're defining. You know, Meryl from King County, I think of King County as a region, but there could be sub-regions in King County. I think of rural entities as being probably 2 to 4 counties. So I think it would just be good to, as a group, look around you and see who are you working with now. Who are your great DV partners that are close by? Who are the ones that you can talk with, consult with, move back and forth with? And I think that would be your region. And it looks like those are the questions. Let's ask folks here. Okay. Right. Okay. Paul, you asked the same thing about geographic parameters, and I hope I answered that. Maybe just revisiting back, do you feel like your questions have been adequately answered for now in terms of geographic parameters? You know, Karen, I don't think I completely answered the centralized intake. There are just so many things going on with that. It's a pledge to work on it. I think the 20,000 per region, I hope that's really, or per agency is clear. And that's one of the issues in terms of making sure that we have enough money for each agency that wants to participate in a region. Yes, thank you. Oh, good. All right. So it looks like so far the questions are answered as best I can for the purposes now. And next steps. October 1st, we will have application materials available. Make sure that they are on our website and that you are notified that they are available. And just in terms of a hint, as you can imagine, this is not the traditional grant where there's a pot of money and you apply for it and tell us what you'll do with that. So the application materials will very much consist of the types of questions that talk about your relationships, talk about your current organizational culture, talk about your history of perhaps making changes. So they'll be very different from what you've had before. Certainly, I would foresee some commitment from partnering organizations, but we are in the process of developing those packets right now. But they will be available October 1st, and October 7th, there will be an Eastern Washington Bidders Conference. Right now we've got that at the Spokane YWCA, and Patty, I'm not sure what the response is going to be. I don't know what room you've got us in, but there might be a larger response than the room available, so we will keep you all posted, and I almost hope that's the case because I do want to see many of you and have the opportunity to talk to a number of you about what this could look like. A little bit more up close and personal than webinars. And then October 14th is the Western Washington Bidders Conference at the UFCW in Seattle, and of course the details on where that is will be coming out to you. November 17th will be the application deadline, and we'll gather. Chris Sullivan will be present with us as we sift through the materials and work on what region would be the best to do this project, to do this demonstration, what regions would be the most helpful in terms of what research might look like in terms of a sample. So again, we're still developing the criteria. We'll get that down a little bit closer to the dates of the bidders conferences so we can talk that through more. So it's not necessarily going to be a matter of how brilliantly you all write. It's going to be a matter of logistics and collaboration and your own vision and mission and where you all want to go together. And I would foresee an announcement of some sort coming right around the first of the year. We'll see how easy it is to determine what regions it should be. I'm sure there might be some negotiation and due diligence, but we're hoping right around the 1st of January for that announcement of the 2 regions. Dan is going to pick up from here.
Sorry, Linda, I just wanted to point out there was one more question from Patty, and I didn't know if you saw that or not.
I did not see that.
Erin, can you read that?
Sure. It's going back to the money. If there are 5 agencies in a region, would it be 20,000 times 5 initially and 30,000 times 5 each year thereafter?
Correct. Okay, here's Nan.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say a little bit more about the kind of the regional aspect of this. When we are talking about regions, we're not thinking of I think so much of 3, 4, 5 discrete organizations within a geographic area that agree to kind of work together, but basically still see yourselves as kind of these as distinct independent organizations in the same way that you have been. We're really looking at, we really hope that you will think about how can you work with these other folks in whatever the region is that you identify in a way that really transforms the overall delivery of domestic violence work in your geography. So that it's not that you exit the demonstration project with each individual organization still having its independent county or sub-area of a county in the same way that you've been, but that you see yourselves as really working together to serve the region. And the reason why we're hoping folks will do this is twofold. One is because we've actually heard from some of you that you want to do that, right? So this is not the coalition saying, oh, this is what we believe everyone should do, and so now we're going to get this funding to make it so. We actually are trying to be responsive to what we've heard from organizations, from our member programs, about there might be lots of different ways that we can do our work across the state. And for some folks, there's interest in that kind of regionalization, and we've already seen it both in the DV Housing First work and in some of the other work that we do with all of you. So it's responsive to that. And we also do think that there could be, some potential cost efficiencies for each participating organization as you rethink, what are the services that are needed in this geographical area that we're talking about. Is there currently duplication of those services, and is there a way to kind of divvy those up so that we're not all doing the same thing, but we're actually able to do a broader array of work, in a more efficient way. And so that's one of the features of the regionalization that we hope you're able to bring forward in your applications, is some thought about how you really coordinate with each other beyond kind of coming together to qualify as a region. This is not a project for the faint of heart. I certainly you know, we as the coalition staff also cannot be faint of heart in doing this. I think, in all honesty, it will, you know, it will cost more than the money that we will be able to provide from the Gates Foundation. But we think that the long-term benefits, both in terms of resources and in terms of what we're doing with families in our communities, you know, make it seem like this could be a really, really great investment. So, we don't we strongly encourage you not to see this as a project to do for the money, just for the money. This is really a project that is about engaging in deep change, and I think you know, for the regions that that come forward and get selected, I think I'm hoping, I fully expect it'll be a super transformative and very exciting and very, you know, roll up our sleeves and get down to it kind of process. The other thing that I just want to make sure you all know is that the grant funding will come directly to the coalition, and then we will be distributing the funding via contract with the participating agencies. And so, you know, that's kind of a different way of doing this, and that will be new for some of us, and, you know, we'll have to do the very best we can to kind of manage both the contractual relationship and the kind of the support and partnership relationship, which is you know, which is the most important relationship that we have with all of you. So, but I did want to make sure you knew that the funding would be coming from the coalition, not from the foundation. Okay, so now I don't know what to do with the technology. I don't know if there are other questions or comments. Erin, do you see anything?
Currently, no, there's no further questions that I'm seeing.
Okay, I hope I didn't scare all of you. We don't want this to be scary. We just want it to be really interesting.
So I think, if I can get to it, oh, technology. There. So the big last slide is, if you've got additional questions, if you want to send them my way, either through email or by phone. Of course, you all probably know that our conference is next week, and if you want to nab me at the conference, I've already made at least one commitment to try and gather with a group, so you are most certainly welcome to do that, and I look forward to seeing many of you next week and certainly hearing from you over the next few weeks as you contemplate whether or not this is a fit for you. I think with that, oh, Judy's got something.
Hi, folks. This is Judy Chen. I am just so excited that there's so many of you on this call. If you are, we also want to encourage you, if you are coming to the conference or who have staff coming to the WSCDF conference next week, to check out the workshops related to domestic violence housing first workshop, yeah, with Chris Billhart and Rachel Payton. Rachel Payton from Portland. And Linda will be there, so we super encourage you to come to that. And then the other thing that we just wanted to say a little bit more is that we are getting a lot of interest from our friends and new friends and old friends around the country on this project, and particularly the opportunity that there is for Chris Sullivan to work in our state to do some research and demonstrate things that we know about advocacy and why survivor-centered advocacy is so super awesomely the best thing for survivors, but there's just not a lot of data on that. And we believe that that will have long-term benefits for kind of our field in the country, and then for our DD programs in the state. So, you know, one of the benefits about potentially participating in this project is being part of that. As Linda said, she is a superstar, and we hope that you will consider being part of, you know, doing that kind of service not only for the country but for your program, because that would be great for your program. So, well, and we're all superstars, aren't we? Okay, so that was just my spiel. With that, we'll sign off. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing and hearing from you, and have a great weekend coming up pretty soon.